what does that tell me? That's 96 million potential customers. One of the most important things that you need to take into consideration whenever you're building items to sell is customer base. How many people are there out there that will actually be interested in buying what you are making? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be teaching you two different builds that has the potential customer base of 96 million. That's going to be this mini Martin house that's similar to the one that we built in the past, and this super cool bird feeder. And the best part about both of these builds is they can be built with just a couple of fence pickets. So let's go ahead and dive into these builds, starting with this bird feeder. So as I was doing the research for this video, going through the different sites, seeing what was selling, I noticed that there was one thing in common on all sites. They were flooded with bird houses and bird feeders. Everyone loves seeing birds and feeding birds. I actually looked it up, and the latest statistic was that 96 million people across the United States watch or feed birds in some manner. So what does that tell me? That's 96 million potential customers. That's just the way that my brain works. Now, don't get me wrong, I love birds and wildlife and all of that as well, but I also love products based around a huge potential customer base like that. But what I've noticed is this same style of bird feeder has been around for years. I mean years. There's just certain things that just never go out of style. Bird feeders, Martin houses, things like that, I mean, they're just evergreen. They're always going to be popular. People will always want them. You can make something simple like this one that's been around forever. I mean, I remember seeing these whenever I was a kid, and now they're getting 62 bucks a piece for these. Or you can get as fancy as something like this, the $380 bird feeder. Okay, now I love my birds, but 380 bucks, to each their own. So I decided to shake things up a little bit from the original version, and I made my own. I remember seeing this tree-shaped design at some point in the past, and I really liked it. So I grabbed a couple of fence pickets and went to town. Let me show you how I made this thing. I'm going to start off by making the two tree-looking sides for this feeder. And to make those two sides, I'm going to be needing 4 boards that are 12 inches long. Like I mentioned before, I'm using fence pickets for this, and because of the varying thicknesses and the varying widths, any of the dimensions that I'm about to tell you is going to be based off material that's a 1/2 inch thick. I'm going to go ahead and rip this stuff down to 5 1/4 inch wide. And as always, I'm about to teach you step by step on how to build this, but if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website. I'll throw the link in the description. So after we have our 4 boards ripped down to 5 1/4 inch wide, let's go ahead and pair these up. We'll be needing 2 boards for each side. So now with my boards cut, I'm going to head over to the miter saw. I'm going to put a 45-degree angle on the ends of each board. So now that we have our end boards cut with 45-degree angles, choose one side to put pocket holes in. Measuring from the bottom, I'm going to measure up 2 inches and make a mark, and 6 inches and make a mark. That's where my pocket holes are going to go. And I'm going to be putting my pocket holes in using Craig's 720 Pro with my drill bit set to 1/2 inch. Keep in mind that I'm just showing you one side for now, but for the opposite side, you'll just do all the exact same steps. Now the next step is going to be to sketch out half the shape of your tree. Now this is super simple to do, but since I may be making several of these, I'm going to go ahead and make a template. Again, this template is super easy to make, but if you like the way that mine turned out, I'll make sure to add a printable template into the plans. So once you have your half template made and cut out, it's time to apply that to our material. With our 2 pieces folded together, let's just lay our template onto the top board, line it up with the edge, and trace it onto our board. I'll be cutting both of these boards at once, that way it creates a mirror image. Now let's go ahead and join our 2 pieces together. I'll be using some exterior wood glue and 1 1/4 inch exterior screws. Now to finish off these sides, we'll be needing 2 strips that are 3/4 inch wide by 9 1/4 inch long. Then put a 45-degree angle on one end of each board. We'll be using these 2 parts as our ridge cap. So now with our 2 top boards cut, let's go ahead and attach it to the base. Since all sides have been cut at 45 degrees, when the top of your ridge cap is perfectly square, you should be touching on all sides. So now that I know the placement that I want, I'm going to put a little bit of wood glue at this angle and throw in a brad nail just to hold the 2 parts together. Now I'll line it up with the base of the tree. I'm going to pre-drill and counterbore my edges at 2 inches and 5 1/4 from the end. And the reason why I'm countersinking these is because we'll have some wooden slats sitting on the top. And if you're wondering why I'm using screws for this part, it's because if you decide to hang these, the weight of the feeder will be pulling on these parts. So now that we have our 2 outside frames done, let's go ahead and make the feeder bottom and then add the top. For the bottom of our feeder box, we'll be needing one board that's 5¼ inches wide by 12 inches long, just like the rest of the material. And then for the side walls, we'll be needing two boards that are 1.5 inches wide by 13 inches long, and two boards that are 1.5 inches by 6¼ inch long. All of our sidewall pieces have 45-degree angles on each end, and I'll install those to the bottom board using wood glue and brad nails. And if you'd like to add screws to help reinforce this bottom, you can do that as well. And making the bottom tray is as simple as that. Now let's add our two side frames and our roof. So to install the two roof supports, I'm going to face these sides with the pocket holes in, put wood glue on the side that will be touching the box. I'll center this, throw in a couple of brad nails just to hold it into place. Then I'll throw a couple of screws in just for extra support. And now to install the roof. On one side of the roof, we'll be needing two boards that are 4 5/8 by 14 inches long. And we'll install those flush with the top angle. I'll be using wood glue and brad nails for this. I'll be leaving a 1-inch overhang on each side and locking everything into place using wood glue, brad nails, and screws. And then for the opposite side of the roof, we'll be needing one board that is 4 5/8 by 14 inch. And one board that is 5 1/8 by 14 inch. The reason for the extra 1/2 inch in width is to compensate for the 1/2 inch overlap at the top. And that's all there is to it. Another super cool fence picket build. Now, if you were using this for decoration, then you're pretty much done. You could either paint or oil this thing, but if you're wanting to actually use this as a bird feeder, I'd drill a couple of holes in the bottom, then just put some fine screen over it, kind of like for a screen door. That way, if water gets inside of this thing, it would drain really easy. The only other thing that I would do if you were going to hang this is 1 1/8 inch in on the top. I would pre-drill and then just screw in some eye hooks. That way you could hang it from a chain or rope, whatever you would like. I think that it is a super cool and easy build, and the profit margins that you could make from this thing, this one's a home run. So now that you've seen just how easy that it is to make the bird feeder, let's hop into this birdhouse. Okay, so to start with, for our little Martin house, we'll call it the little mini Martin house. Let's go ahead and get all of our parts cut. That way we can go ahead and get some painted if you choose to paint yours. Went ahead and painted mine with a base coat of black and then went over it with a white. That way I can distress this out once we get done. So if you're going to be painting the parts that I have painted on mine, you'll need two boards that are 13 inches long by 5 1/4, two boards that are 10.5 inches long by 5 1/4, three boards that are 10 inches long by 5 1/2, one board that is 10 inches long by 3 7/8, three boards that are 5 1/2 by 5 1/2, and 4 5/8 by 5/8 corners that are 5 1/2 inches long. Let's go ahead and start off with our bottom board. And for that, we're going to be needing two boards that are 5 1/4 inches wide by 13 inches long. Okay, so before I actually start to assemble all of these parts, I'm going to go ahead and cut the grooves into our outside boards. It's going to make this thing look like that it has siding on it. And this we're going to do in the table saw. We'll need our two boards that are 10 inches by 5 1/2. Our two boards that are 5 1/2 by 5 1/2. Then lastly, our two gable boards, which are 10.5 inches long by 5 1/4 inches wide. Let's head over to the table saw. Okay, so for this part of it, we're going to be removing just a tiny bit of material to make these grooves. So I'm going to lower my table saw blade down to 1/8 inch. And then I'm going to angle my blade to 45 degrees. Once that's set, we're ready to make some cuts. So I'm going to start off by setting my fence to 1 inch away from the blade, then run all of my material face down at that setting. Then I'll move my fence over to 2 inches, make that cut, and then to 3 inches, and 4 inches, and 5 inches. Once we're done with that, our siding is now in place. So now that we have our little siding decor on there, let's go ahead and take our 10.5 inch long pieces. Again, these are our gable walls. So basically we just need to cut a 45-degree angle from the center to the outside edge. At 10.5 inches, if you line your blade up with this outside edge set at 45 degrees, it should be perfect. Let's get those cut. All right, so now let's go ahead and cut our bird holes. So I'm going to want two holes in this. So using one of my 10-inch boards, I'm going to measure in 2.5 inches, make a mark, and from the opposite side measure in 2.5 inches, and then from the bottom we'll measure up 2 3/4. Where those two marks intersect, that will be the center of our holes. So now that I know where I want my holes, I'm just going to set my wood up on a piece of scrap wood, and using a 1.5 inch bit, I'll drill my holes. All right, so with our holes drilled, let's head over to the 720 Pro, throw in a couple pocket holes, and finally, get this baby put together. So I'm going to start off by putting 3 pocket holes in one of my bottom boards. I'll be putting one 2 inches in from each side and one in the center. And just because fence pickets say that they are 5/8 of an inch thick doesn't always mean that they actually are. So I like to set my drill guide at 1/2 of an inch. Now let's go ahead and get this bottom assembled. Just going to run a bead of glue, line everything up, then lock everything together using 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws. Just to be on the safe side, since this is going to be in the weather, I'm going to go ahead and install 2 5/8 by 5/8 by 10 inch strips onto the bottom. For this, I'll just be using wood glue and 1 inch brad nails. Okay, so now that we have our base built, our holes in our front, we can start to assemble our walls. So for assembly, the 10 inch board with the holes in it, go ahead and put 3 pocket holes in the bottom of the board. And then our 2 5.5 by 5.5 side walls, go ahead and put 2 pocket holes in each one of those in the bottom. This is what's going to secure this to our base. So now with the pocket holes facing down, let's go ahead and attach our 5/8 by 5/8 by 5.5 inch corner post to each one of our side boards. Now with those attached, let's go ahead and attach our front to the sides. Now let's go ahead and place our side and front assembly onto our base. We'll measure 1 inch in, make sure that it's flush with the back, then install our screws. All right. Now we need to install our divider boards. So this is going to be our last 5.5 by 5.5 board. And to do this, I put 2 pocket holes on one end, then 1 pocket hole going down on the other. We'll just line this up in the center of the birdhouse, put in some screws. Let's go ahead and get our back on. So to install this, I'm just going to go about 1 inch down on my side post, pre-drill and install a screw. Then we'll just repeat that step for the bottom. This will allow for the back to be removed for clean out. So with that done, it's time to attach our gables. And to do that, I placed 2 pocket holes in the backs of each one. If you notice that the pocket holes aren't centered, it's because one end of this gable is actually going to be an overhang. So I've cut 1 pocket hole at 3 inches in and the second one at 6. Next, we just need to install our 2 10 inch middle boards. One is 5.5 inches wide, the other is 3 7/8. So now with that assembled, let's move on to our roof slats. You'll be needing 9 boards that are 1.5 inches by 12 inches long, and 1 board that is 2 1/8 by 12 inches long. And to make things a little bit easier for marking out these slats, I'm going to take 12 of these 1.5 inch boards and line them up with my 2 1/8 inch board. Then we'll start by marking out our spacing on our first set of boards. And the reason why I've separated these out into 2 different sets is because I want the shingle spacing to be offset. And to get that look, we'll have to have 2 different measurements. So for this first set of boards, I'm just going to make a mark at every 1.5 inch interval. So 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, you get the point. Once I have 1 board marked, I'm just going to square my boards up. And then using a square, I'll make that same mark on all of my boards. Once I have that first set marked, let's go ahead and mark our second set. And again, all of these are 1.5 inches wide. And for the second set, I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch in and make a mark. And then from that 3/4 mark, I'm going to mark my board at every 1.5 inches. Now that I have that board marked, I'm going to use it as a reference board for the rest, just like I did for the first set. So by making these offset cuts, whenever we go to put the top on, it will give it the offset shingle look. So now with our 2 sets of shingle slats marked, let's go ahead and set up our miter saw to cut these grooves. And just like I demonstrated in the first Martin house build, I'll be using a depth stop on a miter saw and just a little hidden tab. So all that you have to do is set this tab to only make 1/8 of an inch groove into your material. And to ensure that the blade goes all the way across your material, just put a piece of scrap wood behind it. And then that's all we'll have to do is make our notch cuts. And if your miter saw does not have a depth stop, you can easily do this on a table saw with the miter gauge that came with it. Just move the fence out of the way and raise the blade up 1/8 of an inch. And there's even ways that you can do this on a circular saw. So if there's a will, there's a way. All right. So now that we have our little slats cut in our shingles, I'm going to throw a quick stain on these and we'll finish this project up. I'm going to start by installing my 2 1/8 inch slat. I'm going to nail this into place with equal spacing for the overhang. I will just install the shingles alternating our 2 different sets back and forth. So if you have decided to add these little decorative post braces, then we're going to need to hold off on installing the last 2 shingle strips on the front of the birdhouse. This is just so we can add in some extra support for these braces with a brad nail from the top. Once we get these installed, we'll finish up with the shingles. So we'll be needing 3 of the 5.5-inch posts, 5/8 by 5/8. Then if you'd like to add on the post braces, those are going to be 2.5 inches long from tip to tip. Just be careful whenever you're cutting those small parts and make sure to cut those from a long piece of material. And then to install these posts, I'm just going to place one in the very center and then the remaining 2 on the outside edges. And I'll be attaching these with a little bit of wood glue and a brad nail on each end. And then for the post supports, I'm just going to be using some CA glue to lock these into place. Once you have your post in place, you can go ahead and finish up with your shingles. And there we have it. Super cool decorative Martin box that if you are going to sell these things are going to sell like crazy. It's pretty awesome. Now, if you wanted to, you could finish this up with some spar urethane or some teak oil. Really wouldn't hurt anything. And if you were actually going to be setting this on a post of some sort, another option would be to frame in a bottom section to fit a 4x4. That would be super easy to do. So take an idea like this. These things are simple to make and run with it. Anything that's different than what people can actually buy at the big box stores will be a hot item to sell. And stuff like this, you won't be able to keep it.